Assalamualaikum and hi everyone. Now we cover chapter 7, gases exchange and its control. Under this chapter we have three subchapter which is 7.1 gases exchange and control in mammals, 7.2 roles of chemoreceptors in controlling breathings, 7.3 gases exchange and control in plants. 7.1 Gases exchange and control in mammals. Our learning outcome at the end of the lesson, students should be able to describe the structures of hemoglobin and its characteristic as respiratory pigments, and describe three ways of carbon dioxide transport from respiring tissues to lungs. Gases exchange occur in between of alveoli of lungs with blood capillaries. Then oxygen or gas will be transported from lung to the respiring tissues or other organ. And after that, gases exchange occur between blood capillaries with respiring tissues, and carbon dioxide will be transported back into the lung. Definitions of gases exchange. Gases exchange mean the transfer of gases and organism and external environment in either directions. Gases exchange occur by the process of diffusions that involving across a concentration gradient means follow concentration gradients, okay, from high concentrations to a lower concentrations. Then includes exchange of oxygens and carbon dioxide, means our discussions about the exchange of oxygens and carbon dioxide. And this process or gases exchange process occurs at alveoli of lung. Okay, this is structures of lung. Okay, and the small one is the structures of alveoli. Adaptations of alveoli as respiratory surface. First, have thin, simple squamous epithelial cells, which is a single layers of epithelials. Okay, importance to lowers the resistance for gases exchange, mean for simple diffusions. Next, surrounded by numerous blood capillaries. Okay, surrounded by numerous blood capillaries. Okay, this diagram shows only one capillaries, but actually our alveolus covered by numerous of blood capillaries. Okay, importance to provide light surface area for gases exchange. Number 3, alveolar wall permeable to respiratory gas. Our respiratory gas that we discussed is carbon dioxide and oxygen. And moist surface of alveoli for gases to dissolve before diffusions can occur. Adaptations of erythrocyte to transport oxygen. First is has biconcave shape, and importance of biconcave shape to increase the surface area for gas diffusions. Next, has no nucleus, and importance the erythrocyte has no nucleus because to provide more space for hemoglobin. Now we look at the structures of hemoglobin. All hemoglobin are conjugated protein, globular protein attached with hem group. Hem group is a prosthetic groups, and hemoglobin are the quaternary structure which consists of 4 subunits, which is 2 alpha polypeptide chain, the dark blue here, and 2 beta polypeptide chain, light blue here. And hemoglobin, each subunit of the hemoglobin or polypeptide chain contain one hem group. We have 1, 2, 3, 4 because of we have 4 subunit, and each subunit consists of one ferrous or iron ion and functions of this ion importance to carry oxygen. One ion will carry 1 molecules of oxygen. Characteristics of hemoglobin as respiratory pigment has high affinity for oxygen, means it can bind oxygen even when partial pressures of oxygen is low and will forming oxyhemoglobin, and hemoglobin will saturated with oxygen in the blood and lungs. Okay, here the equation is hemoglobin plus with the 4 oxygen because have 4 hem group. Okay, in the alveoli, due of the partial pressures of oxygen is high and will form oxyhemoglobin. When the partial pressures of oxygen low in the respiring tissues, so this oxyhemoglobin will dissociate to form oxygen and hemoglobin. Okay, second characteristics of hemoglobins as respiratory pigments. It can easily release oxygen when the partial pressure is low. Examples in tissues that undergo respirations. Okay, when tissues undergo respirations, mean partial pressures of oxygen is low. Why? Because the tissues was use the oxygens to produce the energy or ATP. Okay, and these oxygens will be released from the blood capillaries and entering the respiring tissues. Okay, oxyhemoglobins in the blood capillary will dissociate and forming oxygens and hemoglobin. Then oxygen will be transferred to the respiring tissues. Here we can see that oxyhemoglobins, when the partial pressures of oxygen low, okay, at the respiring tissues, and this oxyhemoglobin will be dissociates to form oxygens and hemoglobin. Another characteristics of hemoglobin as respiratory pigments is cooperativity characteristic. Cooperativity characteristics mean the bindings of oxygen to the first subunits or hem groups. Okay, here the bindings of one oxygens to the first subunits of hem groups will cause remaining subunit or hemoglobin to change their conformations, and this increase their affinity for oxygens and the result in formations of oxyhemoglobin. You can see from the diagram, okay, first oxygen bind to the hemoglobin and they will increase the affinity or change the conformations of the hemoglobins to make it more affinity towards oxygens. It will cause bindings of second oxygens, after that third oxygens and fourth oxygens. Next characteristics of hemoglobin's respiratory pigment. Okay, one hemoglobin binds loosely and reversibly to 4 oxygen and forming oxyhemoglobin. Okay, which is oxygen bind at the ferrous ions of hemoglobin. Hemoglobins can also bind to carbon dioxide and forms carbaminohemoglobins. Okay, the name of carbaminohemoglobins because of carbon dioxide will bind at the amino groups of hemoglobin. Here is carbon dioxide bind with the hemoglobin, which is amino groups of hemoglobin, and will form carbaminohemoglobin. Gaseous exchange will be interrupted. Okay, when hemoglobin binds to carbon monoxide. Okay, and carbon monoxide is an irreversible inhibitor and forms hemoglobin, and this will cause lowering the affinity for hemoglobin to bind to oxygen. We can see from the diagram. Okay, when the carbon monoxide bind with the hemoglobins, okay, these oxygens and carbon dioxide can no longer be carried, and this will interrupt our gas exchange. Exchange of gases depends on the partial pressures of each respiratory gases in lungs and bloods. Means that when the partial pressures of, for example, when the partial pressures of oxygen is high in the alveoli after inhalations or inspirations, okay, so the oxygen will be transported to the blood in the blood capillaries, okay, due of the partial pressures of the oxygens in the blood capillary is low, okay. Okay, because of gases exchange occur by the process of diffusions, mean the process should follow concentration gradients, mean from high concentrations or high partial pressures to a lower partial pressures. Partial pressure is the pressures of one types of gas, example like oxygen, that proportional to its concentrations in the mixtures of gases and not affected by other gases. We can see from this diagram, okay, so in the lung or in the alveolus have high partial pressures of oxygens compared with the partial pressures of carbon dioxide. Okay, because of high partial pressures of oxygens in the alveolus, okay, these oxygens will enter or diffuse into the blood capillaries. Okay, while for the carbon dioxide, okay, have high partial pressures of carbon dioxide in the blood capillaries compared with the partial pressures of carbon dioxide in the alveoli. So, carbon dioxide will be diffused into the alveoli. Okay, so gases exchange occur here, and here has a blood capillaries that carry oxygenated blood, okay, transported into the heart, and heart will be transport blood to the respiring tissues. In the respiring tissues, oxygen was used to generate the ATP and produce carbon dioxide. Because of that, partial pressures of carbon dioxide in the respiring tissues high, while the partial pressures of oxygen in the respiring tissues low. Because of that, okay, due of the high partial pressures of carbon dioxide in the respiring tissues high, so the carbon dioxide will be diffused into the blood capillaries or tissues capillaries. Okay, while for the oxygens, due of the partial pressures of oxygen in the tissue capillaries more higher than partial pressures of oxygens in the respiring tissues. Okay, so oxygen will diffuse into the respiring tissues. So we can see another gases exchange. Transport of oxygen. First, okay, this diagram shows the alveolar space, and this is blood capillaries. Okay, in the alveolar space or in the alveoli has high partial pressures of oxygens, and oxygen will diffuse out into the blood capillaries, and oxygen will combine with the hemoglobin, and form oxyhemoglobin. Okay, here is oxygen pickup, and after that, this oxygen will be carried to the heart, and heart will pump to the other tissues, and tissues will undergo respiration and will cause, or respiring tissues will undergo cellular respiration and will reduce or will lowering the partial pressures of oxygen, and this will cause a red blood cell that consists of oxyhemoglobin, and oxyhemoglobin will dissociate to form hemoglobin and oxygen, and this oxygen will release out and diffuse into the respiring tissue to use in the process of cellular respiration to generate ATP. Okay, before this, we learned about the transport of oxygen. Now we look at the transport of carbon dioxide. Okay, carbon dioxide from aerobic respiration in mitochondria move to the cytoplasms, then diffuse through the plasma membranes and capillary wall to the blood plasma. Okay, they have three methods of carrying carbon dioxide from tissues to the respiratory surface. Okay, first, 10% of carbon dioxide dissolve in blood plasma. So 10%, remember about the 10% of carbon dioxide dissolve in blood plasma. 30% as carbaminohemoglobin, and 60% transported in red blood cell as bicarbonate ion and move to the blood plasma. In respiring tissues, has high partial pressures of carbon dioxide and low partial pressures of oxygen. Okay, this is due of cellular respirations produce carbon dioxide as a byproduct and use oxygens to generate ATP. Has three ways transportations of carbon dioxide. Okay, first, okay, due to high partial pressures of carbon dioxide in the respiring tissues, so carbon dioxide will diffuse out and then entering blood capillaries through capillary walls, and about 10% of carbon dioxide dissolve in blood plasma. So carbon dioxide will combine with water in the blood capillaries and slowly will form carbonic acid. And then second way is about 30% of carbon dioxide that diffuse out from the respiring tissues and entering the red blood cell, and then combine with the amino groups of hemoglobin, then will form carbaminohemoglobin. Then number 3, or waste number 3, okay, about 60% of carbon dioxide transported in red blood cell as bicarbonate ion and move to blood plasma. Okay, and this carbon dioxide that move out from the respiring tissues will entering blood capillaries through capillary walls, then entering red blood cell or erythrocyte. In the red blood cells, so carbon dioxide will combine with water and will form carbonic acid catalyzed by carbonic anhydrase. And after that, this carbonic acid will dissociate to form bicarbonate ion and hydrogen ion. Okay, then this bicarbonate ion will diffuse out to the blood plasma and leave red blood cell in positive charge, mean leave the hydrogen ion in the red blood cell, and because of that chloride shift occur and shifting the negative charge that carry out by bicarbonate ion to the blood plasma, and this chloride ion from the blood plasma will entering or diffuse into the red blood cell. Functions of chloride shift to maintain the neutralities of the red blood cell. Okay, or maintain the electrochemical neutralities of red blood cell. And increasing of H plus or hydrogen ion in the red blood cell will cause the red blood cell become more acidic. Okay, then this will cause the hemoglobin will bind with the H plus and will form hemoglobinic acid. So hemoglobinic acid or formations of hemoglobinic acid to prevent a decrease in pH of the red blood cell. Carbon dioxide will transport from respiring tissues to lung. Okay, now we look what happened in alveoli. So in alveoli have partial pressures or high partial pressures of oxygens but have low partial pressures of carbon dioxide compared with in blood capillaries. Okay, in blood capillaries has high partial pressures of carbon dioxide, and this will cause carbon dioxide will diffuse out from the blood capillaries and entering alveoli or alveolus. Okay, based from three ways transport of carbon dioxide. First, 10% of carbon dioxide that dissolve in plasma. Then we dissociate and carbon dioxide will diffuse into the alveoli. And second way is about 30% of carbon dioxide that form carbaminohemoglobin in the red blood cell will dissociate to form hemoglobin and carbon dioxide. Then carbon dioxide will release into the alveoli. Okay, all this reversible process. Okay, and last is about 60% of carbon dioxide that transport as bicarbonate ion in red blood cell. Okay, so what happened is use of high partial pressures of oxygen in the alveolus and affinities of hemoglobin towards the oxygens. Okay, so hemoglobinic acid, here hemoglobinic acid will dissociate and make the hemoglobin bind with the oxygen, and H plus then combine with the bicarbonate ion that diffuse in to the red blood cell, shifting with the chloride ion diffuse out from the red blood cell. Okay, this is called as reverse chloride shift. And this H plus combined with the bicarbonate ion form carbonic acid and catalyzed by the carbonic anhydrase. This carbonic acid will dissociate to form carbon dioxide and water. And this carbon dioxide then released to the alveolus due of different partial pressures. 7.2 Roles of chemoreceptor in controlling breathing. Our learning outcomes. At the end of the lesson, students should be able to state the types of chemoreceptor. What is chemoreceptor? Chemoreceptor is a receptor that detects the changes of hydrogen ion concentrations due to changes in carbon dioxide concentration. Like we discussed before, carbon dioxide will combine with water and form carbonic acid catalyzed by carbonic anhydrase. And after that, this carbonic anhydrase will dissociate to form H plus and bicarbonate ion. Okay, this is when partial pressures of carbon dioxide high. Okay, and when the partial pressures of carbon dioxide low, okay, so this bicarbonate ion will combine with the hydrogen ion to reform carbonic acid, and this carbonic acid will dissociate to form water and carbon dioxide, and after that carbon dioxide will release. And we have two types of chemoreceptor. First is central chemoreceptor and peripheral chemoreceptor. From this diagram, we can see the types of chemoreceptor and their locations. Okay, first, central chemoreceptor, okay, located near the respiratory center. And this central chemoreceptor very sensitive to changes in hydrogen ion concentration in cerebrospinal fluids. Okay, here surrounding our brain is called as cerebrospinal fluid. And second is peripheral chemoreceptor that located at the carotid arteries and aorta. Okay, carotid arteries is a major arteries that supplies blood to head, and aorta or aortic bodies, okay, sensitive to change or sensitive to changes in carbon dioxide concentrations and hydrogen ion concentration in blood. So another receptor, but not under chemoreceptor, is stress receptor. And stress receptor is located in walls of alveoli and bronchiole. Okay, that's all. Thank you.